Hello and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. I'm going to be showing you today how I'm going to quilt this centerpiece that we made last week. I'll link the video from last week on how we made this. This is a free pattern from Fat Quarter Shop. I've got a link on my website to it. And you can make the full-size jelly roll quilt if you choose. I simply made one square, one complete square, so that I have this for my fall centerpiece on my breakfast nook upstairs. And I promised last week that I'd show you how I'm going to quilt it. I'm going to quilt it on my domestic sewing machine. It's going to be very simple, mostly straight line quilting. The first thing that I'm going to do is I obviously had to put the walking foot on my Janome machine because that's very important. I've got the backing, the batting, and the top here. And I've just simply pinned it with some pins. You could baste it with spray baste if you choose, but I've simply just put some straight pins in it. And the first thing I'm going to do is do a stitch in the ditch all the way around the outside center and around these rectangles in the middle, just to get everything stabilized here on the backing and the batting. I have the quilt up here on my domestic sewing machine. I'm going to be using Essential Pro, a natural thread. This is from Connecting Threads, and I have a link on my site for that. You can check that out if you're needing some thread. But this is what I'm using in both the top and the bobbin. And so let's go ahead and get started. To do a stitch in the ditch around these rectangles, what I'm going to do is start over here, and I'm going to stitch, first of all, the entire center, and then I'm going to come around and finish the outside like that, so that I'm not having to cut my thread at all. I will start here and end there. I'll start here, and I'll go first around the center. Then I'll continue along this rectangle, the outside, the inside, this inside, the outside of this one, the inside of those, the outside of that one, the inside of these, and the outside of that one. One other thing that I did is I basted all the way around the outside edge at about 1/8 of an inch, all the way around, because these little pieces, there's seam lines there, or seam allowances, and they would easily come loose with all of the moving of the quilt's top as I'm quilting it. So I made sure I basted about 1/8 of an inch in all the way around. And then I have now done stitch in the ditch around the outside border and around each and every rectangle. Now I want to do some fun things in the center. You can create some fun motifs even just with straight line quilting. And so today I'm using my walking foot in my Janome machine, my domestic machine, and I'm just doing straight line quilting. So I'm going to share that with you in case you're not comfortable with free motion quilting. Let's do some great motif in the center and even in these using straight line quilting. Let me give you an idea of what I plan to do. I've used my blue pen. This is a water-soluble pen, and there are seam allowances here because these were the square blocks that we put together, and so there are seam allowances going here. And what I have done, and you wouldn't even need to use your marker to do this, you could just use the foot on your sewing machine, but I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from each of those seam allowances, so I've marked that. I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch away from this side. So I've actually created some triangles within each of these areas here that will mimic these triangles out here. Then what I'm going to do, I've located the center, and when I put my ruler I don't know that you're going to be able to see this really well, but I put my ruler there and identified, I went ahead and drew a line, I should say, from this peak here to the center there. Made sure I lined up my ruler there so that line was straight and not cockeyed. We want it straight. And then I went, brought my ruler over to this line here, and I identified 1-inch markings. So here's my center line, and I made a marking at the 1-inch markings here, and I made that on this line. And let me do that over here as well. And so now what I can do, using this center line, again, let me make it darker for you so you can see it. Hopefully you can see it now. I'm going to use that center line to ensure that every other line that I draw on here is straight. So I'm lining up this on that blue line, and I'm drawing another line. And those will be lines that I can use to quilt straight lines from the bottom of the triangle or the base to the top. And I'm going to bring it up here close so that you can see what I'm referring to. So hopefully you can see this a little bit better. I've drawn the lines on each side of the seam allowance. You really don't need to do that because you can use the side of the foot as you're stitching, but it might help you, so go ahead and do that. And then I've identified the center point from the base to the point here, and I've drawn that line, and then I've measured out 1 inch, and I can stitch then up this from the base of the triangle to the point. I'll do the same down here and have 3 lines as I've got here on that side, and I'll repeat this on each segment of the center to make a nice motif for the middle. I will also do that in each of the corners, and we'll do a smaller one in these center parts here. So that is what I plan to do to finish quilting the light background sections. And then I'm going to come back in and work on the rectangles in a minute, but let me get some of this done so you can see what it's going to look like. I've finished stitching this this triangle here. Now what I'm going to do, there's going to be some traveling on previous stitching as I go back and forth and stitch these lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn here. I'm going to travel to that first little blue line, which is right there. Pivot, turn, stitch across the blue line. Pivot, turn, stitch across that same seam line on that blue line. And up there, then I'm going to pivot, turn. So there's a little bit of traveling over some of your previous stitching. So just work as hard as you can to make sure that you're traveling on the same line. And so this is how we'll continue quilting all the way around this center square to create this motif. And it's all a very simple straight line motif. All right, so I've finished all of the lines on the inside of that triangle. Now I'm going to travel. I could, if I wanted to, I could travel straight down and come around and travel over to the other side so that I'm not having to cut my threads and start over. So I'm following the little bit of that rectangle area there. Now I'm going to get back on this blue line, and I am going to go ahead and quilt the base of this entire triangle in the next part of the center of this block. All right, so I wanted you to see I have finished the center. It is completely stitched. And I've wetted it down with a spray bottle, just a spritz bottle, to get rid of the blue ink, so that has all disappeared. And then I went down here, and I simply did this by using my the foot of my machine, and I've gone ahead and done the stitches. This is the tiny little section. This is the larger section in the corner. And again, I took my ruler and I made the 1/4 inch seam allowances around the outside edges. I found the center of this triangle, and then I made 1-inch marks, and then I measured it up from the base, making sure I use that center line to keep things perfectly perpendicular. And so now I can stitch this, and I can do the same thing on each one of the corners. So that's my plan on all of the outside edge for the background fabric. Then we're going to get to the rectangles. So here you'll see I've finished one of the rectangles, and I've simply outline stitched 1/4 of an inch in from the seam allowance. So I've outlined each of the logs in here. And there is a simple way to do this. Let me show you. So on this log, I started over here in this corner, and I simply sewed all the way across 1/4 of an inch in from the seam allowance, came up here 1/4 of an inch, and over here. And then I did 1/4 of an inch on each side of those logs, that seam allowance, between those two logs. I traveled a little bit across that right there. But by doing this, I didn't have to break my thread and rethread it and so forth. I just did it in one fell swoop. So go across the long edge, one long edge of your rectangle, come down, over, up, travel, down, over, up, travel, down, over, up, travel, down, over, and up. And I apologize for the buzzing. My dryer is finished. I need to go get my clothes from the dryer. My centerpiece is done. I've got it all quilted. I am going to get the binding attached here, and I simply took some leftover remnants of backing, and I pieced them together at a 45-degree diagonal, and then folded this lengthwise in half, and that way I can go ahead and bind all the way around. There were some leftover triangles that I'm going to put in my crumb quilt basket, and the leftover backing, that I trimmed away, that is going to get cut up and put into my stash. I can probably put 1.5-inch squares, 2.5-inch squares, maybe some 3.5-inch squares in my stash. So I'm going to get that done. If you need some ideas on how to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, and organized, let me grab my book set here. I'll show that to you, and I'll have it linked below so that you can check that out. There's also a video that teaches how to cut, sort, and organize your scrap stash based upon my Speedy Solutions book. This is the Speedy Solutions Techniques book. I'll have that linked below. It teaches you everything you need to do to get your scrap stash ready to go to be used. And then there's a coordinating patterns book, wonderful scrappy patterns. There's 12 patterns in this book, the techniques plus 5 patterns in this book. And so that's available. I also have a video, as I mentioned, out on my YouTube channel. I'll link that below as well so that you can see exactly what you need to do to get your scrap stash ready to go. But nothing has to go to waste, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All of this can be used in some form or fashion. Now I'm going to go ahead and get my binding on, and then I will have a centerpiece ready to go for my table upstairs. Here's my finished centerpiece. I absolutely love it. I can't wait to get it upstairs. It's very scrappy. I bound it with scraps that I sewed together. Here is the back of the little quilt. And here is the front of it. I hope that many of you will try it. Don't forget, I have a link below of the free PDF for this pattern. It's a wonderful one. You can make a laptop size, you can make a queen size, whatever size you want, a wall size. I have simply made something that will work for the center of my table. So enjoy, and I hope that I've given you some ideas and inspiration on how you can simply quilt using your domestic sewing machine and make some pretty interesting motifs, even though you're just using straight line stitching and a walking foot. So until next time, happy quilting.